everyone, welcome back to Read, where we're all gonna die. I'm Captain Logan.
And I'm Eric.
Eric and I each have a book. I don't know if this has ever happened before.
No, it's not.
Both read a book.
We both have a book.
My book
is much
is
shorter than yours.
significantly longer than your book.
My book's even shorter than you realize this, because there's so many pictures.
Yeah, well, I mean, I thumbed through it at one point, so yeah. But still, it's literature, and you read it, and you're going to talk about it. I'm going to talk about this first.
Yeah.
Eric, would you help me out with this just a little bit? Eric has, I mean, it's been a million years since you
read
read this, but, I mean, you can help me fill in a little bit. So, I was asked by, I think this is a Chewbacca's Lover pick. Yeah, Chewbacca's Lover asked me to read the first book in the Thrawn trilogy. He gave me this request quite a while back, and I finally got this finished. I read this over a good long time, so I'm going to do my best to remember stuff about this book, but I'm going to talk about this in a real overview kind of way, especially because I read the first act of a 3-act thing. I mean, like, very clearly, this gets plenty done, but it is a setup novel, and I hesitate to talk about major things that I know people love and are big, like, major architectural things in the Star Wars Expanded Universe, because I don't know a lot of that stuff, and I'm out of my element and out of my depth.
Some of the characters in this are major characters you probably don't even know.
I bet so. And stuff that just keeps going on
Thrawn's
forever.
like right-hand guy, is it Pelion?
Pelion?
He's huge in the
Is he really?
Yeah, he sticks around. He's very important.
I'm glad to know that.
Yeah.
Because there's a lot of stuff I might bring up in this where I'm like, I don't know about this guy, and then people are like he is in 150
in
things.
This, he's Thrawn's Watson.
Yeah. Well, he's just the right-hand guy, and he's not interesting.
He's there for Thrawn to have somebody to talk to.
Well, he's mostly there to be like the eyes in for the audience, to have somebody to be confused and bewildered and freaked out when he doesn't do what Vader would do. That seems to be his main job, is, hey Thrawn, that's counterintuitive. That's not the normal thing you do. Shut up, Pelion, I know what I'm doing. Although that's not really what Thrawn usually says. Thrawn usually hears him out and then goes, no, we're going to do it this way. Because, and I'll talk about...
Didn't you look at their art?
Say it again?
Didn't you look at their art?
I don't know what you're talking about.
Oh, that's a thing where he it's where he like looks at the art of like he does it at the beginning of the book where he's looking at the art of the
it's just
of the people, and he's like oh yes, I can tell this about this people from the art.
Oh yeah, now I know what you're talking about.
Yeah.
Okay, sorry, I just didn't right away know what that meant. Anyway, because like I feel weird talking about this because like I almost want to have all three of these together before I even speak about it at all, but, you know, I was asked to talk about this, so I will talk about it. But yeah, so I'll talk a little bit later about Thrawn and his, like, philosophy and battle strategy and stuff, but yeah, Pelion, you'd think that, that he would, like, keep constantly, like, you know, pushing that guy down a peg and maybe even, like, kill him at some point, but it's funny to know that he's a main character, because I thought he might die. I wasn't totally sure. But Thrawn, like, is weirdly even-tempered and will, like, listen to what people have to say if they are good ideas. And it seems like, I said I'd talk about this, I guess I'll talk about this now. It seems like the point of Thrawn right away is to say that you can be... and it can be scarier even, you can be evil and have control of your emotions. He's the antithesis to Vader and to the Emperor especially, in that the dark side philosophy was, let your anger consume you. And his philosophy is, well, that's dumb, because... if I just, and it's really driven home at the end when he loses and he doesn't just go off half-cocked and fire everything. Thrawn is anti fire everything, and he says, well, no, the smart thing is to regroup and like remember what you're here to do, and like don't let your emotions consume you. And but he's as scary or scarier than Darth Vader, because he's that level-headed about everything, and he's still about power, and it still makes right, and he can kind of meet eventually Luke Skywalker where he lives, probably. Like, this is the beginning of what a lot of the little bit of EU stuff that I've read likes to deal with, which is that gray area between the light and the dark side. And the movies had not gotten to that. And this, everybody, I mean, a lot of people say this, of course, but, like, this feels so authentic and just, in a lot of ways, I mean, there's stuff I don't like, but for the most part, like, what another trilogy after this 4, 5, and 6 probably ought to have been. He nails the voices for every character.
The Luke stuff's really good.
Yeah, and, like, I like Han and Leia together, and he's got a really good voice for Lando, and, like, he gets this world, and he seems excited and jazzed to be getting to, you know, be the architect of more of it, and it's exciting and thrilling, and you're playing a movie in your mind, but it is literature. And I think that's the best thing
it's a book first.
I can say about Timothy Zahn is, yeah, it's a book first. He's not, he doesn't wish he was in another medium. And he's got a really good command of language. His dialogue is spot on. His descriptions are especially spot on. I never have a place where I feel like he needs different word choice, or, like, there are places where I do find it a little bit difficult to picture what he's showing me because he's working in the Star Wars universe and he's putting a movie in literature. There are things that he has to describe that are difficult to describe in prose. It doesn't go far enough where I feel like he's struggling so much where he wishes he was making a movie. Like I said before, it's not that. It's just, I'm not used to reading the kind of stuff that you usually would depict visually in this medium, and I've heard other people say that, where, like, it's difficult to picture the dogfights and stuff. I think he does as well as you possibly could with that stuff. I'm just not used to, I think more that's on me. I'm not used to reading that kind of action in prose, and so my head doesn't know what to do with it. And some of it might just be, like, I don't know enough about what he's talking about, where there's almost, like, and maybe there's no way around it, where there's almost like a prerequisite, where it's like you've got to know, like battle strategy and things like that a little better than I do, which is, like, not at all. Before I can perfectly picture where he's got ships and things in the dogfights and in the, like, speeder chases and things like that. It's just a little bit difficult to follow, but I don't know if there's any way around that, honestly. This is a guy who is really, really thought out, like battle strategy and tactics and things, and the master manipulation of the bad guy versus what the rebels are trying to do on the other side. It just all feels really super well thought out. I feel like I was enjoying the first half of the book a little bit more than the second half until you get toward the end. And some of it's just personal taste and what I'm interested in versus what I'm not. The more we build on the actual movie stuff, the more I'm on board and really enjoying myself. It's weirdly when we move more away from that and we try to build new things that I get more bored, which is weird, and I'm sure won't happen later on. I really think that's not a slight on the book. It's just what I'm interested in versus what I'm not. So, like, I was really bored with some of the smuggler stuff and the stuff with Card and all of that. Like, he's interesting and, like, you know, again, has his own kind of strategies and like thinks 5 steps ahead, and it's interesting to see how he plays both sides of with the Empire and the Rebels. But like that and Luke being, trapped on the planet with Mara Jade, I was kind of bored with. And I know that relationship is really important, and, like, later on they'll get together and all of that, and I'm just kind of impatient to get to what I know is going to happen eventually. Mm-hmm. So, like, everybody talks about how great that character is, and she starts from an interesting place. I'm just, like, I don't love reading and watching those kinds of stories much of the time, especially when it's characters that I know are going to end up getting along later on, where it's like, I gotta slog through these people hating each other and not trusting each other until finally they trust each other. And so it's hard not to skim through some of that stuff. I wish I knew nothing. I don't know much, but I wish I knew nothing. Mercifully, we don't have too much of Leia on Kashyyyk, because that stuff would have really bored me.
I don't like that stuff. It's really boring.
I think that stuff's kind of boring.
I also don't think, at least the way they're described or the way they're pictured in my head, I don't think those things that chase her are menacing.
I didn't think so either.
They were supposed to be Sith Lords.
Oh, really?
Yeah, apparently, like, in his rough draft, they're, like, lightsaber-wielding, like, people like Vader was training or something like that. And they're like, no, you can't do that. And so he's like, okay, well, they'll be, like, people with, like, long dart guns, I think. It's been a while since I read it. But, like, I remember being like, those guys sound silly-looking.
Yeah, and there is some silly stuff here, and one of the things I should probably talk about is the line this walks between science fiction and science fantasy. Having read this now, what the EU at large looks like makes so much sense to me, and that it got as popular as it did. I should say that, too, that, like, a lot of people that just read the movies don't understand why people became such big Star Wars fans because of the extra matter, the extra material, and it just starts in such a strong, authentic place that, like, I feel like Zahn has got to be the reason that it blew up like it did, because it all builds on this. And from everything you've told me, it seems like everything really builds on this material.
Yeah. Well, and like this is the first like real Star Wars stuff we have in a long time.
Right. So it also is the beginning of Star Wars having something of an identity crisis, and he's a science fiction guy before he's a fantasy guy, and you can tell in his prose. Zahn would write a Star Trek novel to choke a horse. I can just tell that reading this. And also his prose would immediately be leaps and bounds above like 70% of Star Trek writers. But like Peter David was great, and there's some other great writers, like Diane Duane and stuff. But I would love to have seen Zahn write. I mean, he's still around, maybe someday. But like, I would love to see him write a Star Trek novel. But anyway, I do question some of the places he goes with that. Like, it's not. Yeah. Well, first of all, I wanted to mention politics and stuff because I don't feel like that stuff's going too far. At least so far. It's not like there's enough action and fantasy stuff that stuff is interesting because again, it's mostly battle strategy and stuff before it's like. Well, there is some political stuff. I forgot about this, and I should mention this. The bureaucracy of the rebellion is great. I like that stuff a lot because they're starting to lose themselves. They're starting to kind of forget where they started from and what they were fighting for, and it's becoming too much of like again, bureaucracy and maybe even a little bit of like power struggle and egos, and I liked that stuff a lot. There's not a ton of it, but that's looming in the background, and I was kind of glad we went there. That's stuff that you can expound upon in a 400-page novel, and you can't in movies, and it's even sometimes in television, So it's so it makes sense that that's here, but it's not like the prequel stuff where there's just like a bunch of boring bureaucrats like talking. It's more substantial than that, but it does feel more like what a science fiction thing would do than what a fantasy thing. Although
there's lots of politics.
Maybe that's not fair. There's plenty of politics and fantasy things. So
it's not what an adventure thing would do.
Yeah, exactly. Like maybe that's not fair. And this is still about the bigger like good versus evil ideas before it's human condition stuff. Not to say that there's not any of that there at all, but I do think you can tell you're reading a science fiction writer doing fantasy, and I don't even think that's a bad thing. But you can just tell that that's the place he starts at. But yeah, some of the actual like sci-fi lore stuff I question, and again as you alluded to, the big one is the creatures that repel the Force away from a Force user just so that Luke won't have his Force abilities through most of the book, so that it's possible to kidnap him and so that he can't solve certain problems and make the book like half as long. That seemed real easy.
The idea that in this setting where the Force is the thing that binds us and like the entire universe together, there's a creature that naturally evolved to push it back.
Does not make sense.
Does not belong in Star Wars.
Like, I don't get what the Force is, if that's the case. And I have that with other Star Wars things, where I'm like, it seems like the Force changes what it is depending on who's writing it. But in this, it's like...
It's like Superman.
It's like, yeah, what I was going to say, it's like shutting Superman off from direct sunlight, you know? I mean, like that creature is like putting red sunlight on Superman.
Mm-hmm.
The sun does not bind the universe together. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, it is a power source. Like I get that Force users technically have power because some people have the ability to tap into it and some people don't, and that is by definition you having powers. So the couple of places in Star Wars movies where somebody says it's not a power you have, yeah, it is. Like, I have a hard time with that. That's a weird thing to say. But I guess that was Last Jedi, wasn't it? But on the other hand, I also get that it isn't exactly that. Like, I get what that line was talking about. It's just, it does seem like it is kind of a power you have, but you are tapping into a greater thing that is like what am I trying to say? It's elemental, right? So it's just weird that you would have something that could repel it. I don't really understand that. That's very strange. But so that took me out a little bit. I'm wondering at what point we start using the word Sith. That was a question I had as I was reading this.
So, Sith exists in like back matter. So like, we never called Darth Vader a Sith Lord in the movies, but like the back of his toy refers to him as the Dark Lord of the Sith.
Oh, really? That far back?
As far as I know,
because I'm pretty sure Lucas's original script had this. It had that Sith.
Yes. As far as I know, it's the Jedi Bendu and the Sith something.
Yes.
As far as I know, the first time we publish it in fiction, I guess the Marvel Comics do it because it's Dark Lady of the Sith. But like, at least for this continuity, that kind of, because the Marvel Comics kind of don't count and then they do later. But for this, I think it's the Tales of the Jedi comics where we go like way back and we tell the origin of the Sith.
It's interesting they don't do it here because instead of Sith, they say Dark Jedi.
Yes.
And I don't know if that's the same thing or technically something kind of different. I would assume it's different because you have a Jedi who turns out to not be a Jedi but a clone. I want to talk about the Clone Wars here in a second.
George Sabaoth.
Yes, who's really interesting.
Mm-hmm.
Who was a Jedi and survived the Purge, and is now a Dark Jedi in that he uses his Force abilities for his own personal gain and for evil. But I guess that would be different than subscribing to the Order of the Sith.
Yeah. At least the way it ends up playing out most of the time is Dark Jedi are Dark Force users, usually that start as Jedi. Sith are like a specific sect.
So could you be a Sith and have been a Jedi before?
Well, Count Dooku is.
Okay.
So yes. But he's not a Dark Jedi, he's a Sith because he's under Sith teaching.
Right. Yeah, because he's a, for lack of a better term, like Padawan of one of them.
Yeah.
But yeah, I thought that was a really interesting revelation that the guy that Thrawn goes after because he wants to be able to track down Luke Skywalker is not actually a Jedi but a clone of a Jedi. And then you get the sense that the Clone Wars were what, as a kid, I always assumed they were, which is a bunch of clones of actual people. I mean, I realized that in the prequel trilogy that we have now, it's a bunch of clones of actual people, but it's one guy. So when I say actual people, I just mean I assumed it would have been like when I was a kid, I thought if we dramatized it, it would be characters we have heard of that got cloned, and there's a war using those clones. And I get the sense that that's what Zahn thinks it is, or that it's something like that. And I kept wondering what the other clones were like, and I kept wanting to know more about that war, and it doesn't matter now because that ends up being canonical with everything that came after it, which means that even if there are other things that explain what the Clone Wars were, it wouldn't matter because they would be trumped by the movies. and I'm sure there's all kinds of EU stuff that really contradicts each other. There's gotta be, but
especially this early stuff.
Yeah, but I want to know more about what he thinks the Clone Wars are, because it immediately seems way more interesting.
I always assumed that the Clone Wars were a war over the idea of cloning.
Oh, okay.
That like it would be like the Sixth Day.
Sure.
But with Jedi.
Yeah, which is immediately a very science fiction idea.
Yeah, yeah.
But yeah, so there's that, and then what else should I mention? When the whole thing with Luke going back to Dagobah is really cool. I like that whole sequence a lot.
I don't immediately remember that one.
He goes back to the cave, and they have an explanation for why there's dark.
Oh yeah, yeah, I remember that.
And that's all really great. Like, he fills in some blanks in really smart, believable ways. And I love that stuff a lot.
He also does a thing that I think works for his story, but I don't know how it works for like the rest of the EU moving forward, which is he gets rid of Ben Kenobi immediately.
Yes. Yeah, right away.
That works for his story. I don't know how that works for like everything after it. Like, I guess we just don't have Force ghosts like that. We're like,
where they go away.
Well,
because it seems like he's teetering between reality and the afterlife, and we don't play it like that later on. It's even in the prequel movies, it's played like that whole like, I'll teach you how to commune with Qui-Gon thing, where like after they're dead, they're not really dead. They just, they're just ghosts.
Yeah. Yeah, we just don't use Force Ghosts a lot after this. I mean, there's some, but like,
but
he makes a distinctive choice that everyone has to run with afterwards.
Yeah. Okay, I see what you're saying. Because I was going to say but
he treats ghosts almost like they have one final thing to do.
Yeah,
like he treats them like ghosts.
And then they go on the afterlife.
I have finished training you. Now I move on.
Which maybe makes more sense, honestly. I don't know, but it's the timing is maybe a little bit convenient, because like, it's been 5 years and the book starts, and there are lots of different occasions for story, and one of them is that Ben Kenobi is leaving now, and I don't know about the timing of that, but whatever, it's minor. But I do like that he doesn't have to rely on Ben Kenobi anymore, and there is a very distinct difference between, I'm glad you brought that up, because I need to mention this, I love Luke Skywalker in this book. Yeah. And I think it's the most I've ever liked him. Because he's graduated. You see in this a very different Luke Skywalker from where he was even in 6, and it just feels like a real natural progression, but through 4 to 6 to this. And there are a lot of really cool places where, I mean, I'm not sure he got enough training. That's the thing I keep wondering about. But
I mean, it's a 5-year gap.
That's true, but he's got nobody to train him besides the Force Ghost of Ben Kenobi, and so it just doesn't feel like... I'm not sure I totally buy that he's gotten to as mature of a place with all that as he has, but I like how it's handled if that's supposed to be the case. There are all these places where, when maybe at one time he would have panicked, he has like all these contingency plans, and he immediately knows how to handle himself in situations, and it's instinct now. It's like, okay, this thing happens, so I've got like these 3 possibilities of things I can do, and I pick one real quick, and I try it. When it doesn't work, I try something else, and I buy that this guy has a chance against Thrawn when he finally goes up against him. But yeah, he's wonderfully likable. He's really good. Anyway, it's a wonderful book. I have talked a while. A million other things I could have said, but we need to move on. I don't know when I'll get to 2 and 3, but I'll try to talk about those a little bit when I get to them. Or maybe I'll just wait and read 2 and 3 and then talk about it together. But I am excited to do that. But I will just say I did start to get a little bit frustrated toward the end of this, just because. Like, I know there's 3 books, and it started to feel a little padded. It started to feel a little bit like, okay, if you'd only had 2 books or 1 book, you would have gotten, toward the end a little bit more done. Like, I said it got plenty done, but when I get all 3 of them, I'm not totally sure I'm going to buy that it needed to be 1,200 pages long.
Sure.
But I'm not sure yet, so I'll see when I get there. But there's a lot of Star Trek novel trilogies that had that problem too. Well, Eric, you had a quick book to talk about as well.
It's called Cycle of the Werewolf. This does not count as a novel, and I'm not sure it even fully counts as a novella. So
Well, luckily we don't call this like a novel reading show. It's just read. So you read something. And
so this is was originally intended to be a calendar. Stephen King couldn't write like short, like 1-paragraph blurbs, so it becomes a story that takes place in like each month throughout the year. Most of them are 2 to 3 pages. A couple of them are like 6. I think there's like a 4 and then 2 6s. So like there's a couple that are a little bit longer just because he needs the space. But for the most part, they're like 2 to 3 pages. So like this doesn't end up being very many pages. But it's perfect for reading on break at work. I was able to read like 2 months.
Yeah.
Actually, I'd read 2 more months. And for the longer ones, I read 1. Like it's great for a half-hour lunch break. This isn't great as you might imagine, just with the space that's given.
Sure.
It's good for the space that's given. Like as a real short.
I asked you this before, but is it like one story, beginning, middle, end, or?
So yes. This takes place in one town. I forget what the town's called, but it takes Tucker Mills. So it takes place in one town over the course of a year, and there keeps being these werewolf attacks. So the first couple of chapters are just like different people, and then they get killed by a werewolf. And then we have who is essentially the main character, but he's only in 3 of the chapters. There's a kid in a wheelchair, so he's there on July 4th, and then he's there in Halloween, then he's there in the last one. He's the protagonist, as much as that matters. He gets the most pages, because all his chapters are always the long ones.
Would you call that character more the POV character than the protagonist?
No, he's definitely the protagonist,
okay.
but he's not the POV character because each chapter is from a different perspective, except for his chapters.
I see.
So like, it's fun reading just kind of like the short bits of horror where like you just kind of learn a little bit about a guy and then they get killed by a werewolf. Like that's kind of fun. This has been adapted into a film called Silver Bullet that Stephen King wrote the screenplay for. I'm interested to know what that looks like, because I know what I would do with this, which is I'd make this about 120 pages of script, and then I'd make each section like 10 pages, and then give it to a different director. I would love to see this as like an anthology film with different horror directors. Like I think this would be a great thing to do now. You just get you get James Wan, you get John Carpenter, and you get go across and just give each of them like a small little vignette that's like are connected.
Yeah,
I think that'd be an amazing way to adapt this. It's not super deep or anything. It's Stephen King. It's well written. Early on, it feels like he is struggling to get like with his 2 pages. Like I think the first page is actually really rough. But I wish he did more things like this and experimented being shorter form, because there's never a point where I think he's using words he doesn't need. And I don't know if I've ever read a Stephen King thing where he's not using words he doesn't need. So
it's hard sometimes not to read it. This sounds awful, but it's hard sometimes not to read a Stephen King novel with a red pen where you just like, you don't need this.
You don't need this, you don't need this. This doesn't have that. I haven't read a lot of his short stories. I wonder if his short stories read more like this. What it really it sucks because I feel like I like how compressed this is, but also I'm like, oh, but there's so much more you could have done with this. The idea of a werewolf who attacks once a month for a year is a great premise.
Yeah.
I also like something I've never really seen before, which is it plays it as a mystery. And there's a great conceit for how it... Because
as far as who the werewolf is?
Yes.
Okay.
Which is usually difficult because... Well, this guy just got bit by a wolf. But because the whole town is kind of the main character, and the first couple of chapters aren't from the perspective of anyone who knows who it is, you don't have that. You don't have, like, the person... oh, it's the guy that got bit. It's that guy. Because you'll meet that person until like halfway through the book. So that kind of works really well. And even then, the way it's explained that he became a werewolf is not from a bite. He just picks like these weird flowers and they make him a werewolf. It's
weird.
Yeah. But like I kept thinking of like cool. Like I almost want to see someone like rewrite this because I'm like, okay, so the idea of a werewolf murder mystery is a cool idea. Yeah. And the idea of doing a werewolf story that takes place a full calendar year, because werewolves show up once a month, also is a good idea.
Yeah.
I just want to see it fleshed out more. Which is weird, because I'm also praising it for how, like, brisk he is, and, like, not overusing his words. Or,
So you're conflicted on the format.
Yeah, because I like...
Versus the story.
I think it's a fun, quick read. You can probably knock this out in a night. Like, this is, like, numbered, like, 127 pages. Every chapter has a page, and it counts as a numbered page. That's an illustration, and it has a double page spread that also counts as numbered pages.
So it's probably more like 40.
Yeah. It's probably closer to like 40 or 50 pages. You can read this in a night. And it's a real fun, quick read, but I also think the story has more potential than Stephen King gives it credit for, and I think this could have been a full-blown novel. If it was a full-blown novel, he'd waste my time with a lot of stuff. So I don't know. Like, I just want to see someone that's not Stephen King to do this story, because I feel like it's a... I just want to see this remade, because I think it's a great premise for a werewolf story. Who the killer turns out to be is interesting, because it's a pastor, and the way he rationalizes being a werewolf is very interesting, which is basically, well, I didn't choose to be a werewolf. That means me being a werewolf is God's will. And anyone I kill while I'm a werewolf is also God's will, so I don't have to feel bad about it. And that's interesting.
I'm not culpable.
Yeah. And even if I am, I didn't do anything wrong, because this is what God wants in the first place. I think that's interesting.
And always a super dangerous way to look at stuff.
Yeah. So the illustrations are obviously beautiful. So if you can find this, I don't see this very often. I'm not sure how often this has been reprinted. I think this is a first printing, or at least first paperback printing. I recommend checking this out. It's a real fun, quick read. It's not great or nothing, but it's definitely worth checking out.
I wonder if my mom knows about that.
I don't know.
Because my mom's a big Stephen King fan, and she's got a library, but I've never seen it.
I would imagine she knows about it because it got turned into a movie.
You know, good call. And I think she's seen almost the entire library of Stephen King, so...
So even if she's never read it, if she's seen Silver Bullet, she probably knows that it's based on a book.
Yeah, probably so.
But, yeah. So, it's fun. It's nothing, like, super great or whatever. But it's good.
Well, thanks a lot for watching, folks. I hope you enjoyed this edition of Read or We're All Gonna Die. Make sure you read something. And we are going to move on now to the last segment of the Omnibus. We're going to do some news, Eric. So let's get right on that, shall we? Keep watching if you're watching in the playlist. And thanks once again. I am Captain Logan.
I'm Eric.
We'll see you again next time.